Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 10th of March, 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by Alex Thomson, bringing us Eastern approaches from the Netherlands.
Well, we're going to get straight on because lots to cover today. And the Chocolate Brothers were back in action yesterday, Whitty and Valence. They were speaking to the Science and Technology Committee in the House of Commons. And really the message was don't lift the lockdown, Brian. So let's have a look first of all at what Valence was saying. Ministers be flying blind if they leave a gap of less than 5 weeks between each step. Now, what are the steps? Well, we've got a step at the end of the month or so, the end of March, which is going to allow, I think, up to 6 people. I think the rule of 6 comes back then. And then certainly no earlier than the 12th of April. Non-essential retail, personal care premises, hairdressers and so on are going to be allowed to open, libraries, that kind of thing. And then 17th of May, most social contact rules are going to be lifted by the 17th of, not by the 17th of May, at the earliest, the 17th of May. And then no earlier than the 21st of June. What they describe as legal limits on social contact will be removed. So maybe by the summer, maybe we might be allowed to
visit relatives
and so on. Yes.
Well, that's really encouraging.
But Chris Whitty had some interesting things to say. He, of course, being the chief medical officer. Let's have a brief listen to this.
But I think all the modelling suggests there is going to be a further surge, and that will find the people who either have not been vaccinated or where the vaccine's not worked. And some of them will end up in hospital, and sadly some of them will go on to die. And that's just the reality of where we are with the current vaccination. Different groups who potentially are going to die, some of whom we cannot identify in any way. You're absolutely right that the great majority of people who die will be either older or have pre-existing health conditions, but not all. But the great majority, you're absolutely right, obviously. And secondly, we don't know of the people who've been vaccinated who it is that the vaccines have worked in and who it has not. But we know that there will be a minority who won't. Now, I would not get too stuck on individual numbers. I've repeatedly said all the way through this pandemic, forward projections of exact numbers are really difficult to interpret, and I really put huge confidence intervals around them. The general point, though, is this is not just a few people. These would be significant numbers of people who are dying, just as in any given flu year, an average flu year, 7,000 to 9,000 people would die, and in a typically bad flu year, over 20,000 people a year die. These are not ridiculous numbers. They are perfectly reasonable numbers for a significant respiratory virus that is infecting very vulnerable citizens, even when vaccinated, as they may well have been, for example, with flu.
So I find that all quite strange, because on one hand he's saying, the models are showing 30,000 people are going to die, therefore we've got to continue the lockdown, continue the damage to life, liberty and the pursuit of an economy. But those are really numbers that are not so different to what we would normally see in a bad flu season. And we're not exactly sure who's going to be targeted by the virus, because we don't know who the vaccine is going to work in and who it isn't going to work in. So it's really a spectacular position for him to take, I think.
Well, Mike, that's the first time I've heard that clip, so I'm hearing it with the audience absolutely live. I detected sheer delight in his face that elderly people were going to die. He's quite happy with that. It's only the older people, don't worry, it's only the older people, they're going to die. But yes, he said we don't know where the vaccination has worked. And we don't want to get into forward projection of figures. Well, of course, they don't want to get into forward projection of figures because they would have to prove that the vaccine program had worked.
Yes, but the irony here is that the whole policy from the beginning has been on the forward projection of figures.
Well, indeed.
Yeah. So, Alex, I don't know what you make of this, but it seems to be a pretty inconsistent position. He doesn't seem to actually have... because the key problem for me here is that he's trying to present the need for a policy which is as restrictive as it has been over the past year, but he's at the same time reflecting the fact that the numbers don't seem to bear out or justify that policy.
Well, I wouldn't claim expertise in body language or statement analysis, Mike, to the extent of some of the specialists that speak in the alternative media. But as an interpreter, I'm used to listening to people rattle off what they have to say, often with my eyes closed to concentrate more. And there was, to me, an unnatural degree of flatness in the intonation throughout that. Now, people in the chat box are noticing that the eyes are unblinking and drawing conclusions from that. But I know that there are some people who are just more dry and intellectual in their delivery, particularly in Professor Whitty's walk of life. But it did strike me as a forced monotone, an attempt to ram through things which he didn't believe in at the same time as things he did believe in.
Yes. Now, in the chat box, they're making the point that people are taking advantage of normal seasonality here, and I think there is something to be said for that. Just to reinforce that, we don't have a graphic for it, but just to reinforce it, Boris Johnson was writing in the Telegraph today, again claiming that there's going to be a surge, and he's concerned about the surge that seems to be developing in Europe at the moment. So when it comes to the release of lockdown, as we'll see again in 1 second, it's very much dependent on a number of things, and not least the new variants coming. Now, we made this point on Friday. I'm going to show a little bit more detail on this now, but more variants coming. The question is, where are they coming from? This is a question we've been asking on this program for a number of weeks now. But I want to introduce you to this man, Geert van den Bos. He, I believe, is Belgian, and he has published an open letter. And he tweeted this out on the 6th of March, and he said, in this open letter, I'm appealing to the World Health Organization and all stakeholders involved, no matter their conviction, to immediately declare such action as the single most important public health emergency of international concern. Please read and share, and the link is on screen at the moment. Now, before we have a look at the open letter itself, let's just have a look at who Geert van den Bos is. Well, he is very well qualified in this. He has been working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He has been working with Gavi, and he's been working on a consultancy basis in the vaccination arena for many, many years. Highly qualified, and so we should perhaps take note of what he's saying here. First thing he says in his letter is this: I'm all but an anti-vaxxer. As a scientist, I do not usually appeal to this kind of platform to make a stand on vaccine-related topics. The key question is, why does nobody seem to bother about viral immune escape? And this is a very important point, and it's something which has been mentioned on mainstream press, but largely ignored since the vaccination program rolled out. He said he goes on to describe in very technical terms what he's talking about, and then he says, from all of the above, it's becoming increasingly difficult to imagine how the consequences of the extensive and erroneous human intervention, he's talking about the vaccine program, in this pandemic are not going to wipe out large parts of our population. One could only think of very few other strategies to achieve the same level of efficiency in turning a relatively harmless virus into a bioweapon of mass destruction. And he's talking about the new variants coming out in a way that he hasn't seen before. Now, he was speaking a day or two ago on the Pandemic podcast. You can find this on YouTube. And I just want to play a little excerpt from this just so that you get an understanding of what it is that he's saying.
But I got alerted when I saw that all of a sudden, and that was back to end of last year, that all of a sudden we got these highly infectious strains popping up, and that I immediately knew was something which is very, very unusual, because having studied the history of some pandemics in the past, that is not what you usually see during the natural course of a pandemic. And generating such highly infectious strains may be relatively easy for the virus, but we have to realize getting rid of them is a very different story. So that was one observation. And then back a couple of weeks ago, we increasingly saw reports, about people who got their vaccination, even the full vaccination course, and nevertheless were shedding virus. So that means that by vaccination, in fact, we start to be, to turn people into asymptomatic carriers, into people, who have no symptoms, who are protected so far still against the disease, but who are not protected against the infection, of course, and then they will spread also the infection. And so I immediately thought, well, there is something wrong here. Something is out of control, and the vaccines are not going to do, in fact, or to achieve the final purpose. Remember, the final purpose is to induce herd immunity.
Okay, so that's what he's saying. Now, the point that we've been making over the last few weeks is this. The three main variants of concern with capital V and capital C over the last number of weeks and months have been from the UK, Brazil and South Africa, and we've been making the point on this programme, or at least asking the question, is it a coincidence that these three variants are coming from the areas where the AstraZeneca trials were taking place? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not saying that's what it was, but I'm saying investigation needs to happen. This is the point that he's making in his open letter, that investigation needs to happen. Well, thank you again to the person that reminded me of this. This is SARS-CoV-2 immunity escape variants, 7th of January 2021. This is from the UK government, and they are acknowledging that this is a possibility. They're saying vaccine breakthroughs should be closely monitored. It's not being. They're saying vaccine cases who develop COVID-19 should undergo virus sequencing and genotype to phenotype characterization as quickly as possible to understand whether viral variation may explain the breakthrough. This isn't happening. So, I think that Geert's position here that there is a risk that the vaccine, or a likelihood that the vaccine is actually going to make matters much, much worse, is a very valid position. Here is another paper. A new study assesses the effects of 1 versus 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine, because many people asked why, when the British government was saying from day one that it was necessary to get full immunity, it was necessary to have both doses of the vaccine, that suddenly dose 2 was being dropped and everybody was getting a single dose. This paper is suggesting that having a single dose makes you much more likely to be the cause of a viral breakout as a result, immune breakout as a result. So let's just come back to the issue of immunity, and just remember that lockdown will only be lifted if the government's assessment of the risks is not fundamentally changed by new variants of concern, trademark, and they are making the point that already they have 8 variants on the watch list, 4 variants of concern and 4 variants under investigation. So Alex, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but this has been mentioned in mainstream press and then largely dropped. It's not a topic of discussion. But it's clearly something that one of the top people in this field is deeply concerned about. He's expressing his concerns. He's written an open letter. I haven't seen any response to that letter from the UK scientific community.
Nor will there be, in all likelihood, Mike, because the Belgians are far more outspoken about such things when they realise there's a moral problem often, or I should say, to be fair, they have fewer brakes upon their ability to do so than in English-speaking countries. Geert van der Bossen is, it seems to me, as a layman, spectacularly well qualified to talk about this. If you simply look at the part of his career he was in Germany, he got pretty much to the top of the public health tree in Germany, and which is an extremely unusual achievement for a non-German, given the large numbers of extremely well-qualified Germans and given their usual reticence about whether foreigners are up to their high standards and their own philosophy in public health. So he really is up there, able to say this. I'm noticing, talking to teenagers in the Netherlands, that they are becoming aware of things mentioned by Gilad Atzmon in his recent interview with David Scott on the Northern Exposure channel on YouTube, about the cluster of countries involving including the United States, the United Kingdom, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and to a large extent now the Netherlands, where the vaccination is increasingly rolled out more than in other countries, 20, 30% or more, they're aware of the correlation between that and the phenomenon we were all spooked with last year, perhaps without the data at that point, which is this idea of asymptomatic carriers or super spreaders. There's something, a touch of the self-fulfilling prophecy about it.
Yeah, can I just add a bit? I find it interesting this man is speaking out because he's been in the system, as it were. So he's looking at what's happening and thinking to himself, this doesn't make sense to me. He's just got to get that step further and say that he's dealing with people that have got a malevolent intent in their policy, and then it does start to make sense. So this is signs, I think, of the cracks in the wall, if we put it in those terms, where we've got people inside the system starting to realise that something is wrong, and these are very important people.
I'll just mention, by the way, that the last time we even came close to approaching a subject where somebody was suggesting or saying that what they were witnessing was close to becoming a bioweapon, YouTube took UK Column News down. That was the 12th of February. That episode is no longer available on YouTube. I'm going to be interested to see what happens today. Yes. Yeah. Bearing in mind who it is that we're simply reporting what somebody else was saying. Now, let's move on to this. This came from a viewer this morning. Thank you very much for this. My goddaughter lives in Ilford with her husband and 3 small children. A knock on the door presented a woman demanding that the adults immediately take a COVID test. It was the worst possible time. The husband in an important business meeting upstairs on Zoom, and she feeding babies and homeschooling the 5-year-old. She asked if they could return later, and they said no, it had to be done then. The husband was pulled out of his meeting, and the pair of them stood at the door and they were given test kits. The woman then insisted they use their phones to register the test, and the swabs were placed in a box and given to the woman at the door. They both found the incident quite disturbing. Do you know whether it's legal to operate COVID testing in this way? I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Alex. I would say it's not necessarily illegal what they did, but you may have found it, someone may have found it intimidating. Of course, we are free to simply say no thank you and close the door. These things are not mandatory, no matter how bullying the person at the door may be. This applies to, in many cases, TV licensing, another example of it. There's no reason why we can't simply politely close the door and say no thanks. But it does seem to be a step in the wrong direction if we're starting to seeing this type of intimidation in these circumstances.
Absolutely so, Mike. It's, if I read that correctly, council officials from Ilford turning up at the door, and they are known for claiming pseudo-legal powers. But to be fair to that particular woman, she didn't, according to that report, even have to claim any pseudo-legal powers. If you simply say you must do it now, you're not invoking the law, are you? You're simply pressurizing somebody. So this is how a lot of the game is played. So if you then start asking legal powers, council officials start getting shirty and saying, are you a refusenick? Must I put you down on the difficult people's list, the awkward squad? But you have to find a way authentic to you of saying, really? And as Brian has often said, get calmer, get tighter, get more focused, and ask only one thing, bat back only one clause of what has been said or one word of what has been said at a time to force a response on that narrow point.
Yeah, we'll be able to give a little bit of more on this in a moment when we have a look at some of the job vacancies being advertised by NHS Test and Trace.
Where does that take us?
Well, it brings us on to a lot of money that suddenly appeared. Lot of reports over the internet on this. I chose the London Economic here with the headline Test and Trace Bill to pass 37 billion after what it calls a quiet budget cash injection. Let's have a look at the meat of this. Boris Johnson's under fire test and trace service will get another 15 billion in government cash. The small print of Rishi Sunak's latest budget has confirmed. So we've seen over years and years, over Labour Conservative administration, that there's no money to do anything in this country, whether it's schools or it's the NHS or it's the military or it's fixing potholes in the road. But suddenly we've got a mine of money appearing and another 15 billion here. So it went on. The latest tranche of funding for 2021-22 comes on top of this year's spending allocation of 22 billion. taking the total cost of the controversial service to an enormous 37 billion over 2 years. My question is, where has this money come from? How has it suddenly been magicked into existence, and why for this disastrous initiative? Although not mentioned regularly in the budget red book, the small print confirms that Test and Trace will receive a further 15 billion next year on top of the 22. So they keep stressing that this was hidden in the small print. And if I just add a bit more of the report, the new cash injection will come from a special COVID reserve worth 55 billion. Just 700 million of that fund will go to catch up teaching for schools, while 1.6 billion will go on vaccine procurement. So unlimited money for this disastrous policy. And 20 million per month was allocated in the budget for a discretionary fund to help councils support people who can't afford to self-isolate when they have COVID-19. Now, this lady, Meg Hiller, chair of the Commons Public Accounts Committee, is clearly sensing that something's wrong. But again, I'm going to say she doesn't understand what's really happening. So she says Matt Hancock massively oversold this, saying it was part of the NHS when it is not. So presumably that's a lie then. It's costing a lot of money, and it's unclear whether it's having more than a marginal impact on the pandemic. And I think if you compare it with the vaccines, the order of magnitude of spending is massively different. Well, yes, absolutely. If this is a permanent agency set up, we need to know what it's going to look like when it starts delivering what is likely to be routine testing and tracing. Or is it this 37 billion is being spent on something that's a temporary fix? Either way, the taxpayer deserves to know more about how effective it is pound for pound. Now, Mike, it seems to me that she's saying here that 37 billion pounds is being spent, but actually the MPs have no idea what this money is being spent on. She doesn't know what this is for and what it's designed to achieve.
No, and they've set up this agency, but of course most of the service is being provided by Serco.
Yes.
So how much of the money is just going straight into Serco's coffers, and how much of that is busy building future careers for current serving government ministers who may end up as directors of Serco in the future?
And a surveillance system on every man, woman and child in the country. So we'll just finish her comments here. For the eye-watering sums of money spent, even in the context of COVID, we need to know that this money isn't just nugatory spending, that there is a legacy left as a result of this. Well, that's all pretty obvious, Meg Hiller, because if we're spending 1 penny of public money, we should know why that's being spent. And clearly, you have no idea what this money is being spent on at all. We will show you. Let's just pop up this, and I'm going to say this is well done to Auditing Britain. This is some work here which is producing fantastic results. Bit of an unusual picture on screen, but let's have a look at the video clip where all will become apparent.
Sorry?
No photograph.
Sorry?
You are not allowed to film and take photos of anything.
You are not allowed?
Yes.
Yeah, you are not. I am.
No. This is here. It's an NHS program, government program.
Yeah, what's going on? Because there's no signs.
That is what I was saying. We said NHS mobile test. Are you filming?
I love your hairstyle.
No. Let me see the phone.
What do you mean? Let me see.
Look, you cannot film here. It's a government program.
Where did you get that haircut? Because all the hairdressers are closed.
Look, that is my natural hair. So
What's going on here, man?
it's NHS mobile testing site.
So what you guys are doing?
Mate, you've got to turn that off.
No.
We won't talk to you while you're filming us. You're not allowed to film us.
Oh.
Okay, because this is a government establishment. So I need
That's
to
what I'm
turn it
trying-
off now.
Yeah.
Listen to me. I need to turn it off now.
That's what I'm trying to work out. What's going on?
Right, tell you what. Turn it the other way around and turn it off.
Why don't you turn the other way around to walk?
No.
Very good. Let's go.
So what is it then?
Like, we're not talking to you.
Why?
You're filming us,
You're,
and you're not allowed to film us.
so you want me to point that way?
You are not allowed to film
Don't
us.
come
So
too
point
close.
It that way,
Don't
mate.
come too close.
Point it that way.
All right. Okay, I'll point this way. Yeah, happy?
Mate, no, I'm not happy. You point it that way, not that way.
This way?
You can point it that way if you like.
Okay. So what's this place?
Well, I'm not talking to you.
What? You tricked me, man. You said point it that way.
Man, listen. The video that you have, I mean, you need to delete that video.
Otherwise, what you gonna do?
You need to
No,
delete
you
the video,
need to
man.
delete the
Don't
video.
come too close, man.
Why not?
Seriously.
I'm within 2 meters.
Well, you keep coming closer to me.
I'm telling you, stop filming.
Okay, just stop coming close to me, yeah?
Just stop filming us. Okay?
Why?
End of.
What do you mean, end of? Who do you think you are to tell me what to do? Hey, what's this place, man? Where you go? What's going on? Don't call the police. I just came to ask you a question. Why?
You either go or I call the police.
But this is public land.
You're filming and you're not allowed to film this site.
Who
I'm
says?
telling you that. It's a government, it's a law, mate. It's a government rule.
Okay.
You cannot.
Okay.
You cannot
Which
film
law
us.
are you stating?
Mate, when you came in here, I told you know how to film.
Hey,
That is
listen,
the
Psycho
government
Bob,
over there.
Psycho Bob, or whatever.
Delete the video.
Delete.
Yes, delete it. Okay, delete the video.
Right.
All right. Let me.
Don't
Bring
post
it,
that.
bring it. Come over.
After I finish, I will delete.
Alex, I almost don't know what to say after watching that video. We've got an empty car park where the individuals that you could see on screen, I'll assist the audience. I'll just bring this one up. Beg your pardon. Let's just get back to that one. Let's just pop this on screen so you can see. This was a close-up of some of the individuals in the car park. Some of them wearing masks, some of them not, hands in pockets. This is where the public's £37 billion is going on these people. And the aggression from those two men who came out and said, completely untrue, you can't film here. Of course the gentleman could film there because he was standing on public land. But now we've got a snapshot of what's actually happening with this COVID surveillance system.
Well, isn't it the case that they should be proud of what they were doing if it was something that was useful to society?
Well, that's one way of putting it, Mike, but if we just look at the aspect of the law here, we've got public money being thrown away for people to lean against cars with hands in pockets, and to other individuals while they're being paid out of that money to threaten members of the public who are carrying out perfectly lawful act of filming while standing on public property. So a lot of questions to be asked. Well, the UK column stepped forward. We sent an email to the Department of Health, which apparently controls the test and trace team. And we said that basically we'd received a video clip. And this is the questions that we asked. Why is NHS Test and Trace allowing employees to attempt to intimidate members of the public? Why does the NHS Test and Trace employee falsely claim it's against the law to film the site? Why are there at least 7 NHS Test and Trace employees being paid to stand idle, many with their hands in their pockets? So we've already sent that off and we wait to see what the response will be. And of course, if the response is silence, then that will effectively be telling us that there is now a cover-up of what is taking place with Test and Trace and how £37 billion worth of money is being spent. But let's give you a bit more on this because we decided to have a look at the jobs available, and very quickly we can scroll through this. We've got an analyst place for 36,000 to 45,000, and this is working with the Joint Biosecurity Centre. So now we can really see what's going on here, which unfortunately that Labour MP, the lady I've just mentioned, couldn't actually see, Miss Hillier. We've got this one here, Assistant Policy Advisors, 23,440 to £30,000. Remote working, also with the Joint Biosecurity Centre. We've got an epidemiologist here, salary 36 to 45, well, 46,000. I thought this seemed quite low for what was probably quite a highly qualified person, but apparently they haven't got enough of these people, and what these adverts are doing is recruiting people for working in local areas. So these are not central posts, they're all largely dispersed posts.
But they're all with the Joint Biosecurity Centre. So what is NHS Test and Trace? Is it a separate agency or is it part of the Joint Biosecurity Centre?
I think this is one security organisation, Mike. An HEO data scientist, 28,000 to 37,000. Policy team leader, now the scale is rapidly going up here from £49,500 to £62,000, and it gives the opportunity to be part of something really special. NHS test and trace purpose is to break chains of COVID, but we've just heard from the terrible two twins that they haven't got a clue whether this is breaking the chains or not. And this is where it gets interesting. And to answer your question, Alex, because if we look at the experience criteria, the following experience is essential for the role: excellent communication and networking skills with the ability to overcome barriers and influence others. So this is not scientific, this is about behavioural change. We've got another one here, technical business analyst, 49,500 to 62,000, remote working again, and have a look at this one, constructively challenges different viewpoints and works to achieve a consensus opinion. So this is about applied psychology. This is not about using deep scientific knowledge in order to crack the COVID virus.
Alex, in the graphic that I show from time to time of the infrastructure around the Cabinet Office and the National Security Agency, I've put the Joint Biosecurity Centre as the fourth intelligence service, really. Do you have any criticism of that? I mean, is that a fair thing to do? That's how it appeared to me to be, and a lot of this recruitment is going into that organisation. What is being built?
Well, the only analogy we have for it, Mike, is JTAC, the Joint Threat Analysis Centre, housed at Thames House, MI5 headquarters, and drawing its staff from the three main intelligence agencies and a little beyond that, and specialist police and the like. In that case, we would have been a little wrong to say that JTAC was an intelligence agency. Rather, it was a team drawn from the intelligence agencies and housed in one of them. When you first drew attention to the JBC, I suppose it's going to be called from now on, the Joint Biosecurity Centre, I said, well, maybe it'll be MI6 hosting this one, and it seems to be the same concept. Anything with joint in the name, as in the military, Brian will be familiar with, means drawing from the three main branches and housing them in one place, in a base of one of the three. So to that extent, you may have been a little over-ambitious in saying that this Joint Biosecurity Centre was a fourth intelligence agency. However, JTAC, the previous analogy, doesn't have bases around the country. It has a headquarters and staff. If the thugs who came out there had any grounds to stand on when they said it's the government, it's their laws, it's their rules, you can't film, they will presumably have been invoking the only legislation about filming from public land into a site that I'm aware of, which is the Official Secrets Act 1989. When I worked at the Cheltenham headquarters, the donut, there were signs up to that extent to stop people poking their cameras through railings and filming identifiably staff or their number plates. That I can understand, but you put signs up. I think that's actually as directed by the statute itself in the 1989 case. None of that here. And if we indeed have a de facto intelligence agency with bases around the country, so, oi mate, you need to stop filming is more than an idle threat. If that's the case, then yes, indeed, it would be a fourth intelligence agency. There's no other way of fitting it into the existing intelligence and statutory framework I'm aware of.
So more work needed on this to see really who these people are and what their agenda is, but it's not looking good, I don't think.
Indeed. Right, now if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to join us there. You'd be very welcome, and that would be much appreciated. Also appreciated would be if you would share our material as you find it on the various platforms, and that is fantastic when it happens.
Indeed. Now, we'd just say that yesterday Mike and I attended Ian Crane's funeral in London. We had been saying as much as we could, keeping in mind the respects of Ian's family. We were delighted it was a sunny day, and the small service, very, very limited service, went exceptionally well. It was actually live streamed, which we weren't aware of at the time, but I understand that well over 1,000 people did actually join the family in this very poignant service. The link to that video isn't currently available. We will find out if it's still to be available, and we will let people know. But just to really say thank you to everybody who was there listening in and watching, and sending their love and condolences to Ian's family. Also like to say a big thank you to everybody who is donated to Lynda Thyre's Legal Expenses Fund, which we've been drawing your attention to under fundraiser. This is now up to £15,375. The aim is to get it somewhere around 35,000, and I just encourage people to help Lynn Thyre, and of course it will be to help David Noakes, because they have suffered such abuse in prison as a result of trying to help people who have had cancer or have cancer. So it's up to us to see what we can do with this. Please donate if you can. And if you don't know anything about Lynn and David Noakes, you can go on the UK column, have a look for this article, and catch up.
Right, that takes us back to Scotland, Alex, and bring us up to date with the Nicola Sturgeon situation.
Well, here I am once again doubling up for David Scott, but there's so much Scottish development at the moment that we have to treat them, however, summarily. For those who are completely new to this, the former First Minister Alex Salmond, after he left office, found his own party colleagues, in fact his own former protégé Nicola Sturgeon, and a coterie of women around her in the Scottish Government headquarters at Bute House, scheming, I think it's now fair to say, as to how to hook him on charges of sexual molestation of said women, who were all close not just to the Scottish National Party, but to the Sturgeon wing of it, to the radical feminist wing that had taken over. So, as Alex Salmond has been testifying, and more latterly Nicola Sturgeon in front of a special committee of the Scottish Parliament on this matter, we have seen that Sturgeon's starting position was, I launched and won a civil case, a judicial review, against the patent unfairness of the Scottish Government's internal process that stitched me up as an abuser. I then won, said Mr. Sturgeon, a criminal case where the jury disbelieved all 13 counts against me. And because of that, we're in this mess with the Fabiani Committee of Parliament finding that nothing is being released to it. Often it is Nicola Sturgeon's own deputy, the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, who makes the decisions on legal disclosures. And the big thing here is, I've mentioned this the previous time, but the slide you now see is the Scottish Government's disclosure page of this. Almost never gets disclosed, but the clamour was overwhelming this time. Legal advice given to the government. So we have here to do with an external firm of silks or QCs, attorneys in American terms, advising the Scottish Government on how to successfully defend themselves in Alex Salmond's civil case in late 2018. The judicial review, that is, where Mr. Salmond said it was an entirely unfair process that found me a molester. So I have done a full reading of that that evidence, which only stopped being uploaded on the 5th of this month, conveniently just after Nicola Sturgeon had given testimony to Parliament, the decision made by her own deputy not to give the releases in time. So the playlist and the video on screen at the moment, it's always a good idea to read to go to playlists when you find a YouTube channel. I have got a Scotland playlist there, which you can see the logo for, and the video in question uploaded last night is called The Legal Advice the Scottish Government Concealed from Parliament. So here it is. You can see also a good way to get to it if you follow David Scott as Albion_Rover on Twitter. He's tweeted it out last night. It's a mammoth one. It's 2 hours, 40 minutes of reading. But glutton for punishment that I am, I did one. And if people are unaware of how to go through long YouTube videos into sections, if you put in the timestamps in the right way, as I did last night, what you can do is the yellow boxed area at the bottom of a screen, which will work on a computer or a mobile device, if you hover around the bottom area of the video pane, will show you the timestamps and sections. If you then press that, click it or press it depending on whether you're computer or mobile, a separate box will open down below the video pane, which will allow you to flit to the relevant section of the reading or the video that you wish to go to. Because this is a good, dozen documents that were disclosed covering the timeframe September to New Year's Eve 2018, and they show the Scottish Government dealing with its external lawyers in a rising flurry about everything that's going wrong in the case. And the big telling thing is that Nicola Sturgeon and her Chief of the Civil Service, Leslie Evans, about whom there's an article on the front page of the UK column at the moment, took the view, oh no, we don't really need to take this too seriously. That's evident in what is happening as the lawyers are tearing their hair out. So from the reading that I did of the documents and from the texts are available from the page I showed at the start of this segment, we see it starts to get a bit hairy on the 7th of December that year. At this point, the Scottish Government's solicitor, Paul Caquette, the Deputy Solicitor for the Scottish Government, is writing rather embarrassedly to the Scottish Government's counsel, external legal advisors, saying the problem is that Leslie Evans is saying, why are you cautioning us that our case is not as strong as we thought? We are certain we're going to trounce Alex Salmond in his judicial review. And the bit I boxed shows that it's an embarrassed way of saying it seems that Nicola Sturgeon is making noises behind the scenes to Leslie Evans, saying, don't worry about it, love, you just carry on, you stand your ground. The case is every bit as strong as we told you it was. So that's a bit of embarrassment. Now, we're going to press through this as quickly as we can, but the big three, if people are pressed for time in listening to the whole recording, are the 16th, 17th and 19th of December memos written in quick sequence by the Scottish Government's external counsel, Roddy Dunlop QC, to the Scottish Government. Mr. Dunlop, by the way, who was having a hard time of it trying to get the Scottish Government to see that they had a flawed case against Alex Salmond, and they were on the defensive too. He's not just any old QC, he is Scotland's most senior silk, because since this time he has been appointed Dean of the Faculty of Advocates, the equivalent of the Chairman of the Trial Lawyers Association in North America. And at the same time, Nicola Sturgeon and Leslie Evans and the Lord Advocate and the Solicitor General within the Scottish Government were saying, oh, no, there's no need, it's not as bad as you think. Right, so here are the cringy highlights, as it were. So this is the Scottish Government's lawyers trying to make the Scottish Government see sense and make come to an understanding with Alex Salmond. They're asking, who's actually undertaken searches, because Alex Salmond's lawyers got wind of basically dishonest failures to disclose everything to the Scottish Government, and this forced them to go through the Scots law equivalent of a discovery procedure, a commission and diligence, where someone gets called into a legal situation and forced to hand everything over. So what happens after that? If you go to the next slide. There we are. The following day, this is the crunchiest of all. This is a very confidential note at the time from the council, just to the Lord Advocate, James Wolfe, the chap we saw last week trying to bully members of the Scottish Parliament, and to the Solicitor General, saying what on earth is going on. But at this point on the 17th, it's clear to the lawyers there will be an open commission, which is the legal procedure of hand over your documents. Look at what they're saying here. This is all extremely frustrating because it was entirely avoidable that they were given such embarrassment, because they've had to stand up in front of their lawyerly colleagues, the court and the other side, and say actually the Scottish Government was not telling the truth about the emails and the redactions involved. To the end of that piece, the 17th of December, states that, or later in the piece anyway, says that Leslie Evans herself basically can't be bothered to take this seriously. The lawyers said, would you please write down exactly what you knew about the fiddling of these emails, and instead she got someone, the lawyers are saying in what's on screen at the moment, reading between the lines, Leslie Evans said to someone, would you dash off a few lines to shut these lawyers up? And that's it. The lawyers, of course, immediately saw this and got very disgruntled. Next slide. This is then the 19th of December. They're finding further things which are horrifying them, the external lawyers. They're finding actually that the Scottish Government has been wrong in its sworn statements against Alex Salmond, that there was an independent person appointed, namely Judith McKinnon, to investigate Alex Salmond and to duly find him guilty of molesting women, because the Scottish Government's own procedure required that that person should have had no prior involvement with the case. And the lawyers are saying this is patently untrue, because now we're having to drag out of you belatedly admissions that she was involved in speaking to the women who went on to make the complaints before they lodged their complaints. And there's the bit on screen that shows this with the bold italics, immediately before, immediately thereafter. So actually within half an hour in the second case of a woman being contacted about making a formal complaint, this McKinnon turns up and says, "Hello, dear, I'll be your investigating officer." How credible is that? That on that particular point, the Scottish Government lawyers say, do you really want us to argue that in court, that we'll be laughed out of court? So at the end of that third of the three stiff memos, the Scottish Government's lawyers say this: we're in a position where we think that maintaining a defence of the appointment of that investigating officer may be unstateable, lawyerly language for "I'm not even going to try, don't go there." And the last bit on the screen says, basically, we're about to throw in the towel. We cannot countenance this anymore. This is where it gets really fun, so do go and listen to this all. On the 21st of December, with Christmas in view, the Queen's Counsel, Roddy Dunlop, writes this and says, if you look at the second to last paragraph there, this is a watershed moment. The case is now unstateable. And at the end of it, he rather wryly says, basically, I'm out of here. Merry Christmas. He says, urgent instructions must be obtained, and I wish all of you a merry festive season. So, I mean, a screenwriter or a playwright would have a field day with this grade A material. You almost never get to see what happens in government circles to this extent. But then this is exceptional corruption, and so it requires exceptional cleaning up. So what's the comeback on this? Well, Nicola Sturgeon, of course, who was together with her mini-me, Leslie Evans, the head of the Scottish Civil Service, saying, no, we shouldn't really take this legal case as seriously as the external lawyers say. She herself was a qualified lawyer, but as David Scott mentioned on Monday, and worth repeating here, she actually had to bow out of the legal profession because she had strung a client along about applying for legal aid for them. So Gordon Woods is tweeting here about this. That when Nicola Sturgeon was investigated on this, it was called 3 counts of professional misconduct. No action was taken. She just left the profession because she was in politics by that time. Next slide. The Scotsman carries now a piece by one of the Scottish Conservative members of the committee that's looking into this, Murdo Fraser, who's asked some of the most effective questions. And he's laying out how unconvincing Nicola Sturgeon's evidence was to Parliament last week. This is before the worst of the legal evidence had come out, thanks to Sturgeon's deputy holding it back just a couple more days. So if we look at what he says in that piece, Murdo Fraser, he says there were 2 key areas where Nicola Sturgeon's responses were unconvincing. One was regarding when she knew, and the previous thing we've covered about this, Alex Salmond's Chief of Staff, Jeff Aberdeen, is quite clearly saying that, look, we told Nicola by the end of March 2017 what was going on, and she said, oh no, I didn't find out till Easter. And then there's a third area too, which he puts on screen here, which we put on screen, where basically he says Sturgeon lied, where he says it more gentlemanly than that, and that's the defence of the judicial review brought by Alex Salmond. That's what we've been looking at just a moment ago, the civil case brought first, and the question of whether the Scottish Government followed its legal advice. Here comes the killer. Murdo Fraser says there were 12 days in the same late 2018 timescale I was talking about, during the defence for being prepared for the civil case against Salmond. There were 12 days on which the Scottish Government met its lawyers, consultations with counsel, for which not a single scrap of paper has been published. It's inconceivable that lawyers wouldn't have taken notes. Just 2 of those 12 days have become really controversial, November the 2nd and November the 13th, when the lawyers, as we know now, were saying, look, you are going to lose this case, you need to pull out now, you're wasting taxpayers' money. So the Scotsman, again, is reporting that these records cannot be found. That's been now confirmed by John Swinney, who seems to be the master finder and loser of documents in these matters. And a second article covering the same is the Daily Record. Records between Nicola Sturgeon and lawyers over Alex Salmond don't exist, says John Swinney, the same man that David was talking about on Monday as having been having some really serious questions to ask regarding interference with witness lists, even in, shall we say, ordinary civil cases between local councils and individuals. Meanwhile, what's happening in the Scottish Government at the same time, or rather the Scottish National Party? The Glasgow Herald is reporting that, wouldn't you know it, a sex scandal, just the thing that was slung at Alex Salmond, except this one seems to have more legs to it. The Glasgow North Member of Parliament has actually had to resign this morning. He was the chief whip for the party and their Westminster contingent, but it now appears that he's been accused of groping 2 men, and that the SNP didn't follow up on the matter. So that later in that piece we read, or rather the presentation of the headline by the Herald later on in the piece, is that the victim in question says they've happily swept this under the carpet, and the only way I can get action is by having the public know what's going on within the Scottish National Party. And this is a staffer who's blown the whistle on being groped, and who has allegedly covered this up? No, none other than Ian Blackford, of course, the deputy chairman of the Christian group of members of Parliament at Westminster, who called in this staffer allegedly and said, now here's the person you falsely accused crying on the sofa. You must drop the matter now, shake hands and go away. So 2 people, the first of them being a resigned Sturgeon, that tweet there, are taking stock of this and saying that Patrick Grady, the MSP who's just resigned, and Ian Blackford, who allegedly covered up for him, decided that the thing to do would be to call the complainant in to face the accused instead of taking it seriously and formally. Exactly what Salmond was not allowed to do. No, he wasn't supposed to seek mediation, because Sturgeon's whole shtick was, I'm a champion for oppressed women, and I had to battle on with this case despite the lawyers saying, call it off, it's going to be a massive waste of money and embarrassment, because, said Sturgeon, I'm having to prove my case for the underdog, for the women. Well, turn it round, and it doesn't work like that. George Laird says that Patrick Grady has stood aside as the chief whip of the SNP at Westminster. Why did it take Sturgeon so long to act? Well, Grady is an ultra-loyal Sturgeon supporter. This explains why Grady isn't suspended. Well, I have a couple more slides on this, but just to break up the monotony of me speaking, I wonder if Brian, who's been in investigations of this kind for a while, can think of something as egregious as this having happened anywhere else in the United Kingdom over, I think, 20 years you've been looking at this kind of thing now.
Well, Alex, my first comment on this is that you've given a lot of detail. People are always saying when things are going on, where is the evidence? Where is the evidence? In this case, as you've mentioned, there is a fantastic snapshot of evidence showing exactly what's been going on in the Scottish government, and to me it shows complete breakdown. But what example would I always come back to where we've seen utter lies, we've seen documents lost, we've seen things covered up, denied, swept under the carpet? That always comes back to the abuse of children. And the best piece of whitewashing that we've seen in the last 18 months, of course, is the end of the ICSA child abuse inquiry, where that inquiry simply did not call in survivors of abuse as children, did not call them in to give evidence. Therefore, there was no evidence to move on through with the investigation itself. And one of those examples I still can't talk about in detail at the moment in order to protect the person concerned. But for me, simply look at the abuse of children and you can see a trail right through Westminster and the CPS and the police, where lies have been told, documents have been lost, meetings have or have not taken place with or without minutes. And often when people ask for the information, that information is simply redacted. So the general public aren't even allowed to see the level of connivance that you're demonstrating in Scotland. So people should look at this material that you've shown, because of course, if you can see how the mechanism of corruption works in the Scottish government and within the SNP, you're getting a very good template for how it works in Westminster amongst Labour or the Conservative Party, for instance.
That's a sharp point you make there before we wrap up this segment briefly, because the habit had become so ingrained in Edinburgh, as it has in Westminster and in local councils elsewhere as well, the habit of let's just redact the blighter to get rid of it. That what happened was, we all do this from time to time, you type someone's email address, the first letter resolves to someone else's name that you didn't mean to send to, you send the email, you think, oh blast. Well, this happened in the Scottish government with regards to some emails, which Salmond's side then said cough up as part of the civil procedure to go before the judge. And the SNP response, or the Scottish Civil Service response, even worse, when this was realised, was, well, let's just redact that bit out. Salmond's lawyers, of course, were cute to this, And so this is what prompted the Scottish Government's own counsel, Roddy Dunlop, Scotland's best silk by many people's estimation, to say, you've just shot me in the foot and made me look a fool in front of the whole Scottish legal fraternity, and you've lied, and you're wasting taxpayers' money while doing it. In fact, it was the Director of Operations for the Scottish Government, a lady who's now left the Scottish Government and moved to Carnegie, UK, who was I should say, the honest woman in the piece, because at the end of the disclosures towards the end of December, in what I read out, she's the one saying, Lord Advocate, will you please come to your senses and drop this case and stop saying, oh, well, Salmon will win that point, but we will press on with the case because it will get our point across. And with good communications management, the plebs will understand that tainted by apparent bias doesn't mean what it seems to mean, because the judge did come out in the end and say Salmon had been found against in a procedure tainted by apparent bias because of this McKinnon problem. Now, just to wrap this up and to show that whenever it's an Edinburgh scandal, it's sex and sexuality is in the background, a senior SNP MP, one of the colleagues then of Gropey Grady, as we might now be calling him, who's now resigned as the whip, is a lady, Patricia Whitford, if I remember the name correctly, who has, like other SNP women before her, Joan McAlpine comes to mind 20 years ago, reached for an appalling analogy in saying Scotland must be independent. It must be independent because Scotland is a battered woman, and she says that Scotland has been locked up in the bedroom without the checkbook. Always this idiom is reached for, of this idea of sexual violence and repression. It comes out of the beast, as it were, as the first line of attack, and we see often that the boot's on the other foot in reality.
Yeah, so a lot more to come out, which we will report.
Okay, let's move on to Green New Deal. And, the government has announced floaters. We're going to be putting money into developing floating platforms for wind turbines, offshore wind turbines. That's good news, isn't it?
I don't think so, Mike. No.
Okay. So that would be part of a £1 billion. This is part of their £1 billion net zero innovation portfolio. So they're putting forward £68 million for the development of energy storage technologies, because they recognise that wind turbines and solar are intermittent power sources and something needs to be done about that. So they're putting some money into that. They're putting some money into unlocking the full potential of floating offshore wind technology, and they're putting money into turning farmland from productive food growing purposes into biomass instead. What was Anne-Marie Trevelyan saying? This funding will allow us to develop new ways for unlocking the potential for green energy. And she said, as we continue to make big strides towards the goal of eradicating our contribution to climate change. I wasn't sure whether she meant humanity there. But anyway, which brings us on to farming itself. And if you remember, we've mentioned this many times before. Back in 2019, Michael Gove was saying at the time, as we leave the EU, we have a historic opportunity to deliver a farming policy which works for the whole industry. And what was he talking about? Well, he was talking about the fact we're coming out of the Common Agricultural Policy, that we're repatriating money, and we're going to put that money into sustainable farming instead. So environmental land management scheme to incentivise sustainable farming practices, create habitats for nature recovery, and establish new woodland to help tackle climate change. But it's all about converting farmland, which is productive for food, into something else. And so they're talking about direct payments being introduced fairly. This is what they were at before Christmas, starting from the 2021 Basic Payment Scheme year, with the money released being used to fund new grants and schemes to boost farmers' productivity and reward environmental improvements. And they were talking about 3 tiers: Sustainable Farming Initiative, then the Local Nature Recovery, and Landscape Recovery. Well, they've now decided to press ahead with this, and they've got a plan. They've launched a plan for their new grants system. But of course, we've got to keep in mind that one of the key points in this, aside from wildflower meadows, footpaths, so-called public goods, as a replacement for farming itself, was dealing with soil erosion. Now, if you remember, just a few days ago, we were making the point that Michael Gove was justifying this position of sustainable farming in this way. because he was claiming the UK was 30 to 40 years away from fundamental eradication of soil fertility. And we made the point last week that that wasn't actually the case, and that Oxford University had pushed out a report making it absolutely clear that the 60 harvest claim from Michael Gove was quite clearly false. But the point here is not that that sustainable farming is wrong as such, but the particular meaning of sustainability in this context, it's not about maintaining an ability to sustain production over a longer period of time. It's actually about shutting down production. And Alex, my question has been here, what is the policy agenda this Green New Deal taking us towards? Because it looks like we are a country already unable to be food independent is going to be significantly less food independent once this policy begins to roll out, and farmers are encouraged to stop producing food and turn their farmland back into wetlands and wildflower meadows.
Well, of course, 100 years ago, with the rise of totalitarianism, there was this trend towards autarky with a K, meaning self-sufficient in foodstuffs, which Britain hadn't been for 200 years before that. So 300 years before the present, we've already stopped being self-sufficient in grain in particular. And there are some worries, about particularly the EU's now new farm to fork strategy, which basically is a fluffy way of saying food policy or food security policy. That people are starting to ask questions about, the same stateside actually. But I think that the best thing to say about it is if a nation stops pursuing the agenda of being self-sufficient in foodstuffs, or even promoting its farmers and fishermen to allow us to be self-sufficient, then it's time for local communities and families to take up that slack. Because you can, at least in most situations, even urban ones, if you look for the right advice, become effectively, even if it's a monotonous diet, effectively self-sufficient in major foodstuffs for yourself, certainly on a communal basis. And then the government policy can go hang, can't it?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And of course, all of these policies are coming in under the smokescreen of COVID. While people are distracted with COVID, or the green agenda, the reset is all being pushed in.
Now let's move on to censorship, and of course we all know that Ofcom is going to be put in charge of managing the internet and regulation of the internet, but actually it seems to be getting a bit bigger than that. Let me introduce you to the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum. Now this was very quietly launched actually back in June, but they've now published their plans. So who's involved in this? The Competition and Markets Authority, now allowed to commit criminal acts during their investigations, if we remember, Ofcom and the Information Commissioner's Office. But actually from April this year, it will then also include the Financial Conduct Authority. So what's this all about? The newly established Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum brings together several regulators, the Competition Markets Authority, Ofcom, Information Commissioner, and the FCA, to help, quote, ensure online services work well for people and businesses in the UK, so they've published their work plan. All of this is very relevant in view of the government's plan to increase the scope of regulations that apply to online content, e.g. the Online Safety Bill, which hasn't been published yet, which is an area that Ofcom may regulate. Similarly, the Information Commissioner's new age-appropriate design code will set standards that relevant online services should meet to protect children from a wide range of harms arising from the processing of their personal data. And on top of that, a new Digital Markets Union is due to be established in the Competition and Markets Authority. So let's just briefly have a look at what this work plan is all about. So responding strategically to industry and technological developments, they're talking about launching joint projects, complex cross-cutting issues, and so on. They're talking about developing joined up regulatory approaches, which is all about online harms and regulation of online harms, and building shared skills and capabilities. So what I'm saying here, Alex, very interested in your thoughts on this. We're saying the fusion doctrine in action here, because what we're creating is not one regulator for the internet and therefore to regulate free speech, but 4 regulators, then creating an Uber organisation which is currently being called a cooperation forum. But clearly the end point of that is not to be some kind of forum with members, but actually a single organisation.
Yes, if you remember Spitting Image in the 1990s, the puppet show that satirised British politics and the media, because the BBC had its poll of polls back then and its swingometer. The Spitting Image had a sketch once in which they had the talking heads say, "Oh no, we shouldn't really look at that. We should look at the poll of polls." And we get into this situation now with regulatory agencies, aren't we? We have regulators of regulators, and you've just sketched really that the regulators of regulators will also have regulators. You know, the old joke comes to mind about, or the poem about little fleas have smaller fleas upon their backs to bite them, and smaller fleas yet smaller fleas, and so ad infinitum. You know, nesting the levels of regulation is, of course, an ersatz, an alternative for having common sense. You know, things that regulators are there, or watchdogs as we called them in the 80s, because companies and government agencies and some people who are somewhere in between effective monopolies can't make good and rational decisions themselves. If they lose that ability, you set a watchdog or an ombudsman over them. If that ability is now being lost because that's a whole NGO sector and it's a cushy number to get, and so people go in not out of conviction but to line their pockets, then you need to regulate the regulators. So obviously regulation is not the solution, common sense is.
Yeah.
Common sense and honesty. Well, we're going to end on the subject of the police, and we're going to put to our audience, viewers and listeners today, that the police are now approaching a very, very dangerous, I'm using the word, point where they are virtually out of control. Thank you very much to the lady who sent us this little video clip through. I've called it Police Playing in the Park, but let's watch and see what happens.
Hello madam, you alright?
Hi, yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Fantastic. What are you up to today?
I'm just walking around in the fresh air.
Getting your exercise, yeah?
Yes.
Do you live locally?
Yes.
Whereabouts?
Why do I need to tell you where I'm just out on the street?
Yeah, fantastic.
Ooh.
Obviously, if you're getting your exercise.
Oh, what's happening there? It seems like she's getting harmed.
Yes.
Oh.
What are you doing over here? Just recording and this?
No, I've just been walking past, so I was just seeing what's going on.
Okay, just carry on walking, okay? Do not sort of gather around.
Get up there!
So video clip clearly showing the park awash with police who are questioning people on all sorts of things they shouldn't be questioning them about, like where do you live, why are you here? So very aggressive policing and unlimited numbers of police to actually make sure that people aren't in the park and enjoying themselves. Well, we're going to put it to you today that Britain's police are out of control. What you've just seen on screen, where does this lead? Well, it leads to this. Police tase a girl aged 10. The youngest ever UK victim is hit with 50,000 volt stun gun while threatening mother with a hammer in a private gated estate. The Mail reported it, other old media stations reported it, such as The Sun. Disturbing, girl 10 tasered by cops with 50,000 volt stun gun, is the youngest in UK. This was a couple of the comments. The police were confronted by the girl holding a weapon and in an extremely agitated state. An officer yelled at the girl to drop the weapon, and when she didn't comply, a taser was used on her. And I'm going to say to the audience, just think about what you are reading and hearing. The police were confronted by a 10-year-old girl holding a weapon and in an extremely agitated state. An officer yelled at the 10-year-old girl to drop the weapon, and when she didn't comply, a taser was used on her. Well, if we want some common sense, we clearly need a policeman or an ex-policeman to comment on this. So let's bring in Mick Neville, former Met detective, And in this article, he is quoted as saying this: the use of a taser on a primary school aged child is extremely rare and disturbing. A weapon like a hammer or shears in the hands of a 10-year-old could be as deadly as in the hands of an adult. Alex, I read this and I thought to myself that this man, he's either a complete fool or he's lost the ability to think for himself. The police now regard a 10-year-old girl who has a hammer or a pair of garden secateurs, I suspect is what he means by shears, but we'll see. He thinks that she is as dangerous as an adult. This man has clearly lost his cognitive process in my own mind. What do you think about this man?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but a 10-year-old female has half the height and half the body mass of the kind of strapping policeman who attends such things, right? So unless we're dealing with a glut of diminutive WPCs who, as in America, will reach for the gun at the first opportunity because they can't stand up to it. We're dealing with a massive disparity in body mass and height. So it stands to, it's only common sense again, that such a child is not anything like in the same order of threat as an adult, quite apart from the usual consideration, leaving room, of course, for the context that you find in these fraught situations, of course, but the usual consideration that when children, certainly preteens, get agitated, it's those around them, their nearest and dearest, they wish to harm, and certainly not a big policeman who turns up. So that does not make any sense to me, no.
Well, I think we are seeing a former policeman who I can't really do anymore. He's lost the ability to think for himself. If I'd have said in my time in the military, we've got a problem with a 10-year-old girl who's got a hammer and a pair of shears, somebody had said, well, don't worry, sir, I'll go and sort it out. And they would have walked over and taken the items from the girl, but not this policeman. He regards a 10-year-old girl as some sort of monster that's capable of tackling him and bring him to the ground. The man is an idiot. I'm sorry to be a bit passionate about this, but somebody's interfered with his cognitive process. This is what the Sun had to say. The criminal age of responsibility in England is 10. So this is where we're getting to it. If you're 10 years old, you're a major threat to the state. Figures show tasers were drawn, but not necessarily deployed against children aged 11 or under on 29 occasions. We ought to be calling these police forward for proper investigation and inquiries. 29 occasions police are drawing a taser to tackle a child under 11. This is obscene. Charities have called for their use on under 18s to be banned. That's the SOP in the article. So just amazing. Let's add this one, Metro pictured Met police officer arrested over Sarah Everard disappearance. So this was reported a few days ago. This young lady had disappeared, and now we see that a Met police officer has been arrested. But not to worry, because at the time the woman went missing, he wasn't on duty. That's a pretty classic response by the Sun. We'll leave you with some good news, and this is a report in the Mail on Mr. Miller. We spoke about him on Monday with Fair Cop, where he's challenging some of the politically correct nonsense within the police. So well done, that team. Have a look online, and if you can give them any support, please do. Alex, we're right out of time. Any last seconds of summing up?
2 cities to remember. People don't often remember whole names of protocols and whatever, but it was mentioned earlier in the programme, in the case from Ilford, that if you have people turning up at the door and saying, we demand you do certain things that have any relation to medical procedures, such as tests or worse, vaccines perhaps soon, the cities to remember are Nuremberg, that's easy enough to remember because of the trials, and Helsinki. The Nuremberg Protocol, which does have to do with the time of the Nuremberg trials, the doctors' trials particularly, and later the Helsinki Declaration, are just 2 of the memorable times in which international law has determined that you must give your informed consent to any medical procedure. And that's even before we get on to UNESCO and the Council of Europe with their latter declarations. So Nuremberg and Helsinki, you get the knock at the door, you ask whether they're breaking the Nuremberg Protocol. That will give them possibly something to think about.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Alex. I think we're there.
Extra in 10 minutes, yes. Somebody asking if we're going to do one. We are.
Indeed we are. So we will. Excuse me, I'm losing my ability to talk here. I just wanted to say, a lot of people asking us about alternative view. We have made a promise to Ian Crane and his team that we will work to keep the alternative view conferences going. That is our intention, that's our promise. So we are working on AV for 2021. We are looking at timescales and dates for that. So please stay posted. Thank you.
And that's it?
That's it.
We'll see you in 10 minutes if you're on the UK column live stream.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.